The massive Imperial starship burst from hyperspace at the outer edge of the Sol system, its dark metal hull glinting ominously in the faint light of the distant sun. On the bridge, Commander Gray stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression an almost bored mask. He knew this would be just another routine mission. The Empire had sent his fleet to chart new systems, identify primitive species, and extend the offer of integration into the Empire. If they accepted, it would be an easy addition to the growing number of systems under Imperial rule. If they resisted, the Empire would simply demonstrate its superior firepower until they complied. It had worked the same way for over 3 centuries, and he saw no reason why it would be different now. "Sir," came the voice of his sensor officer, breaking the silence of the bridge. "We're detecting artificial satellites and primitive spacecraft orbiting the third planet in the system. The civilization appears to be in its early space age, using mostly chemical propulsion and rudimentary stations in orbit." Commander Gray barely reacted. "Another primitive civilization," he muttered, already envisioning the ease with which they would subdue the new species. He gestured dismissively. "Send the standard greeting package. Let's keep this quick." As his officer dispatched the message, Gray allowed himself a rare smile. The transmission would be simple and polite, but its meaning was clear: surrender to the Empire or face obliteration. They would have a short period to respond before the Empire initiated what they referred to as subjugation protocols. But something happened next that had never occurred in Gray's career. Just minutes after sending the transmission, the Imperial ship received a response. It wasn't from the planet's surface as Gray would have expected, but from beyond the orbit of Mars. His sensors flared with activity, detecting a formation of ships emerging from behind the red planet, their design and movement unlike any species the Empire had previously encountered. "Sir," the sensor officer's voice carried a note of alarm, "a fleet of unknown warships has appeared, and they're advancing on our position. Their technology level is, well, sir, it's much higher than our preliminary scans indicated." Commander Gray frowned, his confidence shaken but only momentarily. This was not how the process typically unfolded, but Gray had faced unexpected obstacles before. "Perhaps these new ships are merely bluster," he muttered, but his fingers twitched with a growing unease. Then the unexpected became even stranger. A communication request appeared on their screens. Gray accepted it, and to his surprise, the image of a human filled the screen, a distinguished older man with a calm, confident expression. His uniform bore 4 stars on the collar, a rank Gray knew to be significant. "This is Admiral Stone of the Earth Defense Fleet," the human said in perfect galactic standard, causing Gray's crew to glance at each other in shock. "We welcome peaceful contact, but be advised. Any unauthorized military presence in our solar system will be considered a potential threat." Gray felt a surge of irritation. This planet, Earth, was barely capable of traveling beyond their own moon. The audacity of this Earth defense fleet to challenge the might of the Empire was, to Gray, a laughable gesture. "I am Commander Gray of the Imperial Expansion Fleet," he replied with a condescending tone. "Your species has been chosen to receive the Empire's generous offer of integration. Accept now and the transition will be swift and painless. Resist and you will force us to demonstrate our power." The human on the screen didn't flinch. If anything, his expression hardened slightly, and Gray saw something dark flash in his eyes. "Commander Gray," Admiral Stone responded, his voice steady and unyielding, "we've studied your empire for the past 50 years. We know how you operate and what you do to integrated species. So let me make this very clear. Earth and the Sol system have no interest in becoming part of your empire." Gray raised an eyebrow, surprised by the human's boldness. 50 years, he scoffed. "Our scouts only discovered your system a month ago. This bravado won't change the inevitable outcome." Admiral Stone allowed a slight smile to cross his face. "Your scouts discovered what we wanted them to discover, Commander. We've had cloaking technology for decades. Those primitive satellites? They're a cover story. We've been watching, learning, and preparing." Gray's face darkened. This was becoming intolerable. "If you've truly studied the Empire, then you know that resistance is futile. We have conquered 10,000 worlds. Our fleets blacken the skies of rebellious planets. Our technology is centuries beyond anything you could comprehend. And yet," Stone replied, unperturbed, "you still don't understand what you're facing. Humanity isn't like the other species you've conquered. We don't follow your rules. We don't think the way you do. And most importantly, we've spent our entire history preparing for threats like you." Gray could feel his temper rising, and he slammed a fist down on his command console. "You have 1 hour to surrender, Admiral," or we will begin the standard subjugation protocol. Admiral Stone gave a small sigh, his face tinged with what looked almost like regret. We warned you, he said quietly, and the transmission cut off. Seething, Gray turned to his weapons officer. Target their lead ship, he barked. Let's show these upstart primitives what real power looks like. His officer turned to the sensors but then froze. Sir, the Earth fleet, it's gone. They're not on our scanners anywhere. Gray's stomach twisted but he brushed it off. They can't have simply disappeared. Continue scanning. If they want to hide, we'll just make them come out. But as the minutes ticked by, no trace of the human ships appeared. Gray's confidence began to waver. How could a species barely past the threshold of planetary exploration vanish so completely? His mind raced through possibilities, and for the first time in his career, a cold knot of doubt formed. Perhaps, he thought, these humans were unlike any of the species the Empire had conquered before. Suppressing the thought, Gray called in reinforcements. When his battle fleet arrived, 20 Imperial warships formed a mighty perimeter around the command ship, each one powerful enough to reduce entire planetary defenses to rubble. As they moved toward Earth in a carefully orchestrated formation, the sensors continued to scan for any sign of the human fleet. Every inch of space was scrutinized, and yet, nothing. Gray's confidence began to return. This bravado from the humans, this pretense of defiance, must have been a desperate attempt to deter them. There was no sign of the Earth defense fleet. He ordered the ships to proceed toward Earth, planning the first strikes. Then the alarms blared. Out of nowhere, human ships appeared at the Empire's flanks, cutting through the formation with staggering precision. The Imperial fleet struggled to react, outmaneuvered by the very primitive ships Gray had dismissed. His heart pounded as he realized, too late, that he had underestimated these humans gravely. The massive Imperial starship Thunder had just arrived on the edge of the Sol system, its dark metal hull reflecting the distant glimmer of sunlight as it hung ominously in space. Commander Gray, an experienced officer, stood on the bridge with his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He'd expected the usual encounter, a primitive species to subdue, their world added to the Empire's list of colonies. The process was practically automatic by now. His fleet would announce its presence, offer the Empire's generous terms for integration, and if they resisted, the ships would swiftly subjugate them, moving on without a second thought. This particular civilization, however, was already proving unorthodox. The Empire's scans showed crude satellites and early space technology around Earth's third planet. But Gray's sensor officer quickly detected something more, and an eerie realization settled over the crew. As the sensors scanned the third planet, a series of unfamiliar vessels appeared, not from Earth itself, but from behind Mars, each one moving with a grace that defied the supposed primitiveness of this species. Sir, reported the sensor officer, his voice trembling slightly, a fleet of unknown warships has just appeared, advancing from beyond Mars. Their technology seems significantly more advanced than we initially assessed. Gray's brow furrowed as he regarded the unusual situation. Still, he wasn't concerned. After all, they were dealing with an Empire battle group, superior in every way to anything this species could produce. Open a channel, Gray ordered, intending to issue a swift ultimatum. But to his surprise, the communication screen immediately flashed, and before him appeared a human face, an older man with steely eyes and an expression of calm authority. His uniform was modest, bearing 4 stars on the collar. This is Admiral Stone of the Earth Defense Fleet, the man said, speaking in perfect Galactic standard, which shocked Gray and his crew. We welcome peaceful contact, he continued, but we must inform you that unauthorized military vessels in our solar system will be considered a potential threat. Gray couldn't believe the audacity. This was a species that had barely mastered space travel, and they dared to challenge the Empire? Suppressing his anger, he spoke, his tone dripping with disdain. I am Commander Gray of the Imperial Expansion Fleet, he replied. Your species has been chosen to receive the Empire's generous offer of integration. Accept now and the transition will be smooth. Resist and we will be forced to demonstrate our power. Admiral Stone's face remained impassive, but there was a steely edge to his gaze. Commander, he replied calmly, we've studied your empire for over 50 years. We know how you operate and we know what you do to integrated species. Earth has no interest in becoming part of your empire. Gray scoffed. Impossible. We only discovered your system last month. There's no way you could have studied us for 50 years. The slightest hint of a smile crossed Stone's face. Your scouts discovered what we wanted them to find, Commander. We've had cloaking technology for decades. Those primitive satellites were a cover. We've been watching, learning, and preparing. Gray's patience was wearing thin. If you've studied us, he sneered, you know resistance is futile. The Empire has conquered 10,000 worlds. Our fleets blacken the skies of rebellious planets. We have technology centuries beyond anything you could imagine. And yet, Stone replied with quiet resolve, you still don't understand what you're facing. Humanity isn't like the other species you've conquered. We don't think the way you do. And we've spent our entire history preparing for threats like you? Gray felt his anger surge and he slammed a fist down on the console. You have 1 hour to surrender, Admiral, or we will begin subjugation protocols. Stone's face softened slightly, his tone calm but firm. We warned you, he said, and then the transmission cut. Gray's anger boiled over as he turned to his weapons officer. Target their lead ship, he barked. Let's show these primitives what real power looks like. His weapons officer worked quickly, but just as he was about to initiate the attack, the sensor displays went dark. A sudden eerie quiet filled the command center, interrupted only by panicked whispers. Sir, the tactical officer's voice cracked, we've lost contact with the Thunder. It's under attack, but we can't see anything. Nothing's appearing on sensors. Gray's heart raced as he pulled up the tactical display. His fleet's flagship, the Thunder, was taking heavy fire, but the screens showed no sign of enemy ships or weaponry. Then 2 more ships erupted into flames, their desperate distress calls filling the command channel. They're everywhere and nowhere, shouted another officer. Our sensors can't detect anything. Our weapons can't lock on. Gray's carefully planned formation dissolved into chaos. Ships fired wildly into the darkness, hoping to hit their invisible enemy. Some even collided or struck each other in the confusion. It was then that the human fleet revealed themselves, materializing from thin air in the middle of Gray's formation. They moved with a fluidity that was almost graceful, weaving around his massive ships like flies around lumbering giants. Admiral Stone's face reappeared on Gray's screen. Commander, I suggest you withdraw. You've already lost 5 ships. We don't need to lose more lives today. Gray snarled, seething with rage. The Empire never retreats, he shouted, his face flushed with anger. All ships release fighter squadrons. Flood the space with bodies, they can't hide from everything. Thousands of Imperial fighters poured from the surviving ships, filling space with a swarm of aggressive pilots. For a moment, Gray felt hope. Surely the humans couldn't stay invisible against so many fighters. But the humans had another surprise. Small metallic spheres floated from their ships, releasing swarms of tiny, fast-moving drones. Sir, shouted the fighter command officer. The drones, they're not just destroying our fighters, they're hacking them. They're turning our own fighters against us. Gray watched, horrified, as his fighter squadron suddenly turned back toward his fleet, attacking their own ships. The once perfect formation had devolved into a nightmare of chaos and destruction. All ships retreat, Gray ordered, his voice shaking with defeat. Fall back beyond Mars orbit? But as his remaining ships tried to escape, the human fleet moved to cut off their path. Admiral Stone's voice returned. Commander Gray, your retreat path is blocked. However, we're willing to let you leave with your surviving ships, on one condition. Gray clenched his fists. He had never been so humiliated in 3 centuries of service. What message? He spat. Tell your leaders that humanity fights differently. Tell them that every ship they send will face new tactics, new technologies, new ways of war that they can't predict. Tell them that every day this war continues, we will only grow stronger and more innovative. We adapt. We evolve. Faster than anyone they've ever faced. Gray looked at his tactical display, taking in the full extent of the damage. 8 of his 20 ships were gone, 5 more were barely holding together, and his entire fighter force had been obliterated. Message received, he muttered bitterly. As the battered Imperial fleet limped away from the Sol system, a terrible realization settled in Gray's mind. This wasn't just a defeat. It was the beginning of a war unlike any the Empire had ever fought. For the first time, he wondered if even the mighty Empire was truly ready for the challenge that lay ahead. The silence of deep space hung over the Imperial fleet as it drifted defenseless in orbit around Earth. High General Reed could only stare in disbelief, watching as the ominous silence spread throughout his ship, leaving it and every other vessel dark, powerless, and vulnerable. His massive fleet, which had been the pride of the Empire and the mightiest show of force ever mustered, was now nothing more than a collection of massive, lifeless hulks. Every sophisticated energy weapon, engine, and shield system had been rendered inert. "General, we've lost all power across the fleet," one of Reed's officers stammered, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Reed gritted his teeth, refusing to show any weakness as the grim reality settled in. He couldn't believe that anything could have this effect on the Empire's most advanced systems. "Impossible?" Reed shouted, barely able to contain his rage. "Our power systems are the most advanced in the galaxy. No force in the known universe can just deactivate them." Across every Imperial ship, Admiral Stone's calm voice broadcasted in flawless galactic standard. "Welcome to humanity's first line of defense. We call it the Web of Silence. It blocks any energy signature we haven't pre-approved." His words hit like a blow as Reed listened, his stomach twisting with frustration. "Your ships are now floating in space, running on emergency power only?" "Impossible," Reed repeated, but his voice was faint, betrayed by a growing realization that maybe it wasn't. He looked around the bridge at his officers, who had grown equally silent, each of them trying to process the scope of what had just happened. "It's not impossible, High General," Stone continued, his calm tone carrying a subtle hint of satisfaction. "While the Empire has spent centuries perfecting its existing technology, we humans have continued to innovate. We've learned a lot from studying your Empire, High General. Now keep watching." Reed glanced toward Earth's moon where his sensors, those few that remained active, detected hundreds of small space stations powering up. Before he could demand a report, the stations began releasing swarms of tiny insect-like drones. The drones moved with chilling precision, spreading out from the moon like a shimmering metallic cloud. What are those?" Reed demanded, though he already sensed they were about to make the situation far worse. He was answered by Stone's voice once more. "These are our repair swarms," Stone explained. "Usually we use them to fix our ships or build space stations. But today, General, they'll give you a demonstration of how quickly they can take things apart." The mechanical insects accelerated toward the Imperial fleet, which still hung lifeless in the web of silence, helpless against the oncoming swarm. Within moments, the first wave of drones reached the ships, clinging to their outer hulls with magnetic grips. Reed watched with mounting horror as the tiny machines moved with terrifying coordination, dismantling the Empire's mighty warships layer by layer. The drones cut into the hulls, exposing critical systems, while others focused on disarming weapons. Within minutes, the Empire's formidable battle cruisers were being stripped of their weapons, systematically disarmed by the relentless swarm. "Stop this at once," Reed roared, his voice tinged with desperation as he watched his proud fleet being torn apart like prey. Admiral Stone's voice remained calm as ever, his response a stinging rebuke. "That's your problem, General," he replied. "You believe there are rules to survival, that war is a series of rituals where the strongest side wins by following certain codes. Humanity learned long ago that survival demands adaptation. You've perfected one way of fighting, but we've created 1,000 new ones." The drones worked with terrifying efficiency, stripping the outer layers of each vessel, removing weapons and disabling shields without so much as a blast of gunfire. It was as if the humans had learned the Empire's tactics and found ways to defeat them without a single shot. "Here's what's going to happen," Stone continued. "We're going to allow you to leave with what's left of your fleet. We'll return enough power for your ships to limp home. But you'll do so without your weapons. Consider it a lesson, and a warning." The humiliation was overwhelming. Reed could feel the weight of his crew's eyes on him, their fear mirrored by a simmering anger. The mighty Imperial fleet, which had terrorized countless species across the galaxy, was defeated without a single human life lost. They hadn't even managed to take one of Earth's ships with them in defeat. As his crew worked frantically to assess the damage, Reed noticed that the Web of Silence had finally released them. Emergency power flickered back on across the fleet, just enough for navigation systems and life support. The mighty battleships of the Empire, however, were no longer the mighty force they once were. They had become symbols of disgrace, humiliated by a species the Empire had dismissed as primitive. "Take the fleet home," Reed muttered, unable to meet the eyes of his bridge officers as they scrambled to follow his orders. They had no choice but to abandon the field, tail between their legs. Just as the last ship began to turn, Admiral Stone's voice cut through one final time. "Oh, and General," he added, his tone nearly mocking. "Those repair swarms left a few surprises in your systems. You'll find out what they are if you ever come back. Safe journey home." The transmission ended, leaving Reed and his crew in stunned silence. His face flushed with shame and fury, Reed could only watch as his humbled fleet retreated. When they returned to the Imperial core, Reed and his officers filed into the War Council chambers, feeling the weight of disgrace heavy on their shoulders. The gathered counselors, the finest minds in the Empire, were tense and skeptical. As Reed delivered his report, their reactions went from disbelief to horror. Impossible? Counselor Tyrell, one of the highest-ranking officials, thundered. No species, no matter how clever, could match the Empire's power. Gray, who had already suffered a defeat at the humans' hands, cleared his throat. I don't think you understand, Counselor. The humans don't fight like other species. They adapt, they innovate, and every encounter only makes them stronger. The counselors murmured among themselves, visibly shaken. The Empire had never faced a force that could learn so quickly, a species that treated war as a means of improvement. In the silence, Chief Analyst Smith, the Empire's foremost intelligence expert, spoke up. This species doesn't develop technology as we do, Smith said, his voice grim. He projected a graph onto the main display. It showed the technological progression of several civilizations, each one following a slow, predictable curve, except for one line that shot upward at an impossible angle. The humans advance faster than any species we've ever encountered, Smith explained. What took the Empire 50 years they seem capable of achieving in months. The council chamber filled with shocked whispers. Reed felt his stomach sink as he realized just how different this war would be. We've detected massive energy signatures around Earth as well, Smith continued. They're building something big. Something we've never seen before. The counselors turned to look as their screens lit up with an incoming transmission. Admiral Stone's face appeared, his expression calm and confident. This time he stood in what appeared to be an entirely new kind of command center. Behind him, massive view screens displayed ship designs and complex systems that the Empire could scarcely recognize. Hello again, Stone said, his tone almost conversational. I see you've been studying us. Let me save your analysts some time. Would you like to see what we've been building? The camera panned, revealing a massive shipyard in Earth's orbit, teeming with activity. Robotic constructors worked in flawless synchronization, assembling ships at a speed that seemed impossible. Instead of traditional shipbuilding techniques, they used swarms of automated drones, quickly and efficiently putting together vessels on a scale the Empire had never imagined. While the Empire clings to its old methods, Stone continued, we've mastered automation and adaptability. Every time you come, we'll have new defenses, new tactics, and new technology waiting. We've spent centuries preparing for threats from space. You're not the first advanced civilization we imagined fighting, and you likely won't be the last. With that, the transmission ended, leaving the Imperial War Council to face the horrifying truth. Not only had the Empire met its match, it had encountered a civilization that could potentially surpass it in every way. This war would be unlike anything the Empire had ever faced, and they had no idea just how far humanity could go. The Imperial Council sat in stunned silence as the final words of Admiral Stone echoed in their ears. The weight of his declaration hung in the air like a heavy cloud, thick with the undeniable truth that humanity was no longer a small, insignificant force. Stone's face appeared again on the main screen, this time accompanied by images of human ships gliding through space, sleek and utterly different from anything the Empire had ever encountered. These ships were more than just advanced. They were living, evolving systems, constantly adapting to the challenges of combat. Impossible speeds, Stone explained calmly. We call this Project Phoenix. Ships that can rebuild themselves, learn from damage, and evolve their defenses in real time. A single ship moved into view on the screen, its smooth surface shimmering as it seemingly reconfigured before their eyes. The ship's shape shifted, its hull morphed into new forms, adapting to environmental conditions and threats as it moved through space. The council watched, transfixed, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a living, evolving entity, constantly reshaping itself to better face its enemies. Your Empire takes decades to design a new ship class, Stone continued, his voice steady, almost condescending. These ships redesign themselves during battle. Every minute they fight, they get better at fighting you. They learn from the damage they take, and each battle they survive makes them more lethal. The council members shifted in their seats, their faces pale with the realization that what they were witnessing wasn't just another technological marvel. It was a fundamental shift in how warfare could be conducted. Reed, sitting at the front, tried to muster a response, but his voice faltered as the implications set in. But surely, Reed sputtered. You can't have many of these vessels. Such technology must be difficult to produce, surely? Stone smiled, the expression almost mocking. That's the beauty of exponential growth, General. By the time you see one ship, we've already built 100 more. And by the time you develop a counter for them, they'll have evolved into something new. This is how we fight. We don't wait for the enemy to catch up to us. We stay one step ahead always. As the screen zoomed out, the council watched as the fleet of human ships moved into formation, and they began to realize that these ships were not just a new class of warship, they were the future of warfare. The Empire's strength had always been in its stability and consistency, in its unyielding approach to conquest and control. But against an enemy that could evolve at such a rapid pace, that unchanging strength was becoming a weakness. Smith, the chief analyst, stood up, his mind racing to comprehend the full extent of the situation. "General," he said, addressing Reed, "how long until they surpass our technology completely?" Reed's eyes were fixed on the screen, but he didn't respond. His face was drawn, the weight of his failures pressing down on him. Smith, however, looked down at his data pad, his hands trembling slightly as he processed the data. "At their current rate of advancement," Smith muttered, "they may have already surpassed us. And if they haven't, they will by next week. It's a matter of when, not if. Their technological curve is not linear, it's accelerating. It's like we're looking at the future, but we can't even begin to catch up to them." The chamber erupted into chaos as the full implications of Smith's words settled in. The Empire was no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. For the first time in history, the Empire faced an enemy it could not simply overpower. An enemy that didn't rely on brute strength, but on constant adaptation, innovation, and evolution. The era of Imperial dominance was ending, and in its place the era of human innovation had begun. Meanwhile, on the command bridge of the Empire's largest space station, Commander Gray stood, staring at the main screen in disbelief. A new fleet of human ships had appeared, not at Earth or in some distant sector, but deep within Imperial space, within the heart of Empire-controlled territory. His officer reported in a shaken voice, "Sir, the humans, they're using our own hyperspace routes. But that's impossible. Those routes are encrypted. No one should be able to access them." Gray knew better than to underestimate humanity's capabilities now. His hand clenched into a fist as he processed the reality that the humans had not only infiltrated their most secure systems, but had done so with ease. "How many ships?" he demanded. "Just 50, sir. But they're unlike anything we've seen before. They appear to be using a combination of Imperial and human technology. The ships are a hybrid, sir." Gray's mind raced as he watched the fleet unfold on the screen. They were sleek, highly advanced ships, but with telltale signs of Imperial design, augmented with humanity's innovations. Admiral Stone's face appeared again on the screen, his expression calm, almost casual. "Hello again, Commander," Stone said, his tone polite but firm. "Like our new ships? We took the pieces your repair swarms left behind and made some improvements. Your hyperspace technology is impressive, but it's much better when combined with our AI systems." Gray's eyes narrowed, his fists clenched tighter as his frustration grew. "What do you want, Stone?" "We're here to free the worlds you've enslaved," Stone replied without hesitation. "While you were focused on Earth, we were listening to transmissions from across your empire. We heard the calls for help, the whispers of rebellion. And today we answer them." Before Gray could respond, the human ships split into smaller groups and vanished into hyperspace, each heading toward a different Imperial-controlled world. "All commands stop those ships," Gray ordered, but he knew it was too late. The humans had already thought ahead, and as Imperial ships arrived at each world, they found that the human vessels had already disabled their orbital defenses using the same techniques they had used against Reed's fleet. But this time they didn't stop there. On the prison world of Chorus, human ships descended through the atmosphere, their advanced shields shrugging off Imperial fire. They landed, and their crews helped free thousands of political prisoners, organizing them into forces that would fight back. At the mining colonies of the Berry system, human technology disabled Imperial control systems, freeing millions of enslaved workers. The humans distributed small devices that protected the freed slaves from Imperial control systems, ensuring their independence. Reports flooded in from across the Empire. The humans weren't just fighting the Empire, they were teaching other species how to resist Imperial control, showing them how to use the very technology the Empire had used to oppress them. Gray watched helplessly as decades of Imperial control unraveled in a matter of hours. It was as though the foundation of the Empire was being ripped apart, not by an external force, but by the very species they had underestimated. A new transmission came in from the Imperial capital. The Emperor's own face appeared on the screen, twisted with rage. "Commander Gray," the Emperor roared, "your failure to stop these humans has led to this catastrophe. Half our subjected worlds are in open revolt. They're using human technology to resist our control. Before Gray could respond, Admiral Stone's transmission cut in on all channels. He was standing on the surface of a freed world, surrounded by aliens of various species, all celebrating their newfound freedom. "You see, Commander," Stone said, his voice calm and full of conviction, "this is the real difference between us. You conquer and suppress. We liberate and share. Every world we free becomes a new ally, learning our ways of innovation and adaptation." The Emperor's face turned purple with rage. "You dare interrupt an Imperial transmission?" "We dare a lot of things," Stone replied coolly. "And we'll continue to do so until the galaxy is free." The transmission ended, leaving the Imperial Council in stunned silence. The Emperor's fury was palpable, but so too was the dawning realization that the Empire's time was over. The humans had not just won, they had turned the tables entirely, showing the galaxy a new way of resistance and revolution. The age of the Empire was coming to an end, and the dawn of humanity's rise had begun. Admiral Stone stood before the Imperial Council, his voice steady, but full of undeniable conviction. "That's why we're winning," he said, calmly and without hesitation. "Look around you. Your empire is built on keeping others down, but we're showing them how to rise up, how to think differently, how to evolve." His words hung in the air, striking a chord in every Imperial officer present. More and more reports were flooding in. Worlds that had once been under the Empire's iron grip were breaking free, systems once subjugated were gaining their independence. Entire species were beginning to learn and adopt human technology, embracing the innovations that had changed the course of history. Meanwhile, Imperial fleets, once invincible, were retreating in the face of an unstoppable resistance made up of both humans and their newfound alien allies. The galaxy was shifting, and the Empire, with its centuries-old strategies, was beginning to crumble. The Emperor turned his gaze to Commander Gray, his face twisted with fury. "Commander," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "Send your entire fleet. Crush these humans. I want them destroyed." But Gray, who had watched the unfolding revolution with growing understanding, finally spoke up, his voice calm but resolute. "My Emperor," he said quietly, choosing his words carefully, "we can't win this way. Every defeat makes them stronger. Every world we lose joins their cause. They're not just fighting us, they're changing the very nature of warfare itself." The room fell silent as Gray's words sank in, the full weight of the situation dawning on everyone present. The Emperor's face darkened in anger, but he knew Gray spoke the truth. Just then, the tactical display in front of them lit up with hundreds of new signatures. The freed worlds had already begun producing ships using human designs, and these ships were unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. The Imperial war machine, once a symbol of unchallenged power, was facing an enemy that had figured out how to adapt and evolve in ways the Empire could never have imagined. Not by strength but by the power of shared innovation and the will to change. As the tactical readouts flickered on the screen, the Imperial Palace itself seemed to shake from a distant explosion, as though the very ground beneath the Empire was beginning to shift. The Emperor stared out of his window at the chaos, his eyes narrowing. He could see the ships of mixed human and alien design flying past, their advanced shields easily deflecting the Empire's best defense fire. They were no longer just human ships, they were now a symbol of something far greater. "How many systems have we lost?" the Emperor demanded, his voice thick with barely controlled rage. A holographic map appeared before him, its red and blue dots painting a grim picture. Red dots indicated loyal Imperial worlds, blue dots represented the freed systems. 3 months ago, the map had been almost entirely red, a testament to the Empire's unchallenged dominance. But now, blue dots dominated the display, signaling that the Empire had lost more than half of its once unshakable hold on the galaxy. Commander Gray, his uniform now no longer pristine, stepped forward. His expression was grim, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes that none of the other officers could match. "My Emperor," he began, 40% of our worlds have declared independence. Another 30% are in open revolt. The humans, they're not just giving other species technology. They're teaching them how to think differently." The Emperor's eyes narrowed and he raised his hand to silence Gray. But before he could speak, another hologram appeared, this one showing Admiral Stone. But this time, Stone wasn't alone. Behind him stood representatives from 20 different alien species, each one proudly wearing a modified version of human technology. The Emperor's face turned pale with rage. "You see, Your Majesty," Stone said, his voice calm but full of authority, "your empire is falling not because we're stronger, but because you never understood what makes humanity different. The Emperor rose from his throne in a swift, angry motion. His eyes locked on Stone, his voice trembling with fury. "And what is that, human?" he spat. Stone didn't flinch. He stood tall, unwavering, and answered without hesitation. "We share. We adapt. We help others grow." He gestured behind him, and the representatives of the various species stepped forward, each one speaking in turn. A tall, crystalline being stood first. "My people were miners for the Empire for 1,000 years, it said, its voice deep and resonant. The humans showed us how to modify their shield technology using our crystal knowledge. Now, our ships are stronger than your Imperial destroyers." Another alien, small and quick-moving, followed. "We were considered too primitive to do anything more than basic labor. The humans gave us AI interfaces that work with our natural speed. We now outsmart your best tactical computers." The Emperor's face contorted in rage. "Traitors. All of you," he shouted. But Admiral Stone only smiled. "No, Your Majesty. Innovators. While your empire forced everyone to follow your way, we showed them how to find their own path. Every species has unique strengths. We just help them use those strengths." At that moment, alarms blared throughout the Imperial Palace. Tactical displays flickered, and the room fell into chaos as hundreds of ships appeared in the capital system. But these weren't human ships. They were vessels from every freed world, ships that carried the marks of both human innovation and the unique modifications of their home species. The Empire's entire military might was now facing an alliance of nations with their own technologies and innovations, each one contributing to the revolution. Stone spoke again, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "You see, Your Majesty, that's the real revolution. Not our technology, not our weapons, but our ideas. Every world we free becomes a new center of innovation. Every species we help adds their own genius to the mix." Commander Gray stood silently, watching the tactical displays with a mix of awe and understanding. For the first time in his life he saw what had to be done. The Empire had spent millennia perfecting a single way of doing things, while humanity had shown the galaxy that there could be countless ways of achieving the same goal, all working together. "My Emperor," Gray said quietly, his voice carrying a deep weight of truth. "We must consider Stone's previous offers of peace." "Never," the Emperor roared, his face contorting in fury. "The Empire has ruled for 10,000 years. We will not bow to primitives and their chaos." Stone shook his head, his expression filled with sadness. "Then you haven't learned anything," he said softly. "Look at your own people." The ground shook again, but this time, it wasn't from the explosion of ships. Instead, it was from the people below, on the streets of the capital. Imperial citizens were carrying tools and devices of human design, demonstrating the profound impact the humans had already made on the Empire's very core. They had seen what was possible, how life could be different, how technology could free rather than control. "Your own people are changing, Your Majesty," Stone said, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "They've seen what's possible when you embrace innovation instead of fearing it. This revolution isn't just about freedom from the Empire. It's about freedom to grow, to change, to become something new." Reports continued to flood in from across the capital. Imperial troops were laying down their weapons, citizens were dismantling control systems, and even Imperial scientists had begun openly sharing their research, inspired by the human way of thinking. The Emperor sank back into his throne, his face pale and ashen, the weight of 10,000 years of absolute control slipping through his fingers. Commander Gray, standing before him, said the words the Emperor could not bear to hear. "My Emperor, we must adapt." The Emperor closed his eyes, his silence speaking volumes. The age of the Empire was coming to an end, not through military defeat, but through the unstoppable force of change and the power of ideas. The sun had set on the old Empire, and with it, the belief that absolute control was the only path to strength. In the vast great hall of what was once the Imperial Palace, history was being written in a way no one could have ever predicted. The rigid banners of the Empire, with their symbols of domination and power, were gone. In their place hung a new emblem, a spiral galaxy with Earth's double helix woven through its arms, symbolizing the interconnectedness of all species and the promise of shared progress. The old walls, once a fortress of authority and command, now stood as a testament to a new era, one where the old ways of domination were being replaced by the endless possibilities of cooperation and growth. Commander Gray, once a proud officer in the Imperial military, now stood at the entrance of the hall in simpler attire, his former Imperial regalia long since abandoned. He was no longer the officer who enforced the Empire's will. Instead, he was a part of something far greater, something that transcended any one empire. Beside him, Admiral Stone, the human who had led the charge for revolution, stood tall with a quiet pride. Together, they watched as representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the hall. Former imperial planets, freed colonies and independent systems, all gathered in a space that symbolized the unity of diverse species. The room was alive with energy. Species of all shapes and sizes mingled with one another, exchanging ideas, displaying innovations, and sharing their unique technological advancements. It was a stark contrast to the rigid, hierarchical, and oppressive nature of the empire. Here, no species was subjugated to another. There was no ruler or subject. All were equals in this new galactic order, and that was the very foundation upon which this new age would be built. Commander Gray could hardly believe how far they had come in just a year. It was as if the entire galaxy had been turned on its head. Admiral Stone turned to Gray with a thoughtful look. "Did you ever imagine it would end this way?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of disbelief and wonder. Gray shook his head, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "When we first found Earth, I thought it would be another routine conquest," he admitted. "Another world to add to the Empire's collection. But you showed us a completely different way to exist, one that I never thought possible. We didn't conquer. We changed." Their conversation was interrupted as the former Emperor of the Empire, now a simple representative of his core worlds, walked up to them. A year ago, this man would have demanded that Gray and Stone bow before him in submission. But today the former ruler of the galaxy extended his hand in a gesture of greeting, a gesture that had once been reserved for those in a position of equality. "Admiral Stone," he said, his voice tinged with humility, "your people have changed everything, not through conquest as we would have done, but through something far more powerful, inspiration." Stone smiled warmly, a glint of pride in his eyes. "That's always been humanity's greatest strength," he replied. "We don't want to rule. We want to grow, to learn, and to help others do the same." The former emperor, once a symbol of the empire's unyielding authority, nodded in acknowledgement, his once inflexible mindset now open to new ideas. Behind him, the hall buzzed with activity as various species continued to exchange knowledge and marvel at each other's innovations. For the first time in millennia, the empire's core had been forced to reckon with the fact that the strength of a society wasn't in its ability to control others, but in its capacity to share, adapt, and evolve. At that moment, a voice echoed through the hall, signaling the beginning of a new chapter. "The Galactic Council is ready to begin," it announced. The gathered representatives took their seats in a circle, no longer arranged in a strict hierarchy where one species dominated over another. Now everyone was equal. This new council was built on the foundation of cooperation, not conquest, and that was the true power that would guide the galaxy into a future of endless possibilities. Admiral Stone rose to take his place at the speaker's position, the weight of history heavy in the air. He activated a massive holographic display, showing scenes from across the galaxy. "1 year ago," Stone began, his voice echoing through the hall, "humanity faced the Empire in war. Today we gather not as winners and losers but as equals. Each of us brings unique strengths. Each of us has something to teach and something to learn." The display behind him came to life, showing a world once enslaved by the Empire. Here, the crystalline beings had combined human AI with their natural abilities, creating living crystal ships capable of thought and adaptation. On another screen, the quick-moving species, once deemed too primitive to contribute, had modified human technology to create transportation systems that defied the imagination. There were thousands of such innovations. Every world, every species had contributed their own genius to this growing alliance. It wasn't just human technology anymore, it was a galaxy of ideas, all interwoven, building upon each other to create something far greater than any one species could have achieved on its own. Stone turned to the gathered representatives. "In just 1 year," he continued, "we've seen advancements that the Empire never thought possible. Not because humans are inherently smarter, but because we understand a simple truth. Real progress comes from sharing ideas, not hoarding them." Commander Gray stepped forward, his voice strong as he spoke to the gathered crowd. "As the former Imperial military commander, I can testify to this," he said. "We thought we were strong because we controlled everything. We were wrong. True strength comes from growing together, from sharing knowledge, from embracing change." The former emperor rose from his seat and took his place at the center of the hall. "My empire stood for 10,000 years, unchanged, unyielding," he said, his voice steady but filled with regret. "We thought that was power. But the humans showed us that real power is the ability to change, to adapt, to become better than we were yesterday. As he finished speaking, Admiral Stone activated a final display, this one showing Earth. We warned the Empire to run, he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. Not because we wanted to destroy them but because we knew that we would change them. Change can be frightening. It can feel like destruction. But from that change comes new growth, new possibilities. One by one, the representatives from each world stood, activating their own displays to show the unique contributions their species had made to this new galactic community. The displays were breathtaking. Innovations in medicine, technology, energy production, and more, all building upon each other. Thousands of minds working together, their collective ideas creating a galaxy-wide revolution of progress. Admiral Stone turned to Gray, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Today, he said, we formalize our new alliance, not an empire but a community of worlds, each free to develop in their own way, but all committed to sharing knowledge and helping each other grow. Commander Gray and the former Emperor joined Stone at the center of the hall. Together they activated the new Galactic Charter. The document was simple yet powerful. All worlds were free to develop their own path, all knowledge was to be shared, and no species would dominate another. This was the foundation of the new age. As the final signatures were added, Stone turned to Gray. We did warn you to run, he said with a hint of amusement. Gray smiled, his expression calm and reflective. I'm glad we didn't, he said. Sometimes you have to face the storm to find a better sky on the other side. Above them, ships of thousands of designs, human, former imperial, and countless new hybridizations, flew in perfect formation. These ships no longer represented conquest or control. They were symbols of something far more powerful, the unlimited potential of minds working together, free to innovate, adapt, and grow. The age of empire was over. The age of endless possibility had begun.